for my first major research project for the Center for Building in North America, I chose to focus on elevators. It's only about 2% of the building, but pretty crucial part.
So the argument then I guess that you're making is that the standards for elevators are just too prohibitively expensive, and it means that people aren't getting any elevators. So it's better that if people get smaller ones and get them in more places, than not have them at all. Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Kara Stern.
And I'm Mike Moffat.
And today we're joined by Stephen Smith, and he's the Executive Director of the Center for Building in North America. He's here to talk about how elevators and building codes have contributed to the housing shortage.
But before we have that conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
Welcome, Stephen. Thanks so much for joining us. Can you start off telling us a little bit about what the Center for Building in North America is?
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I founded a nonprofit based here in New York with the focus of doing research and advocacy about building codes. There's been a lot of movement about land use, zoning, planning across North America, but I felt there was some attention lacking to the sort of details of construction.
Yeah, and then I'm particularly fascinated. There are different groups that look at things like single staircase or building efficiency for climate use and that kind of thing. But you're doing something really special. You're focusing on elevator code. Why is that? Why are elevators so important?
Yeah, so actually, the reason the sort of gateway drug to it was the single stair stuff. So my goal is to sort of look at the whole building from top to bottom, every system. But construction has gotten so complicated. In North America, especially, architects, don't even really design the whole building. You design part of the building, and then you subcontract out the mechanical, electrical, whatever, to somebody else. So the building has gotten so complicated, and I felt like no one really took a step back and looked at it all. Elevators are of interest to me. I bought actually the condo I'm living in right now in Brooklyn in 2021. And shortly after, I had some pretty serious health problems. And when I bought the condo, it was a lot of walk-up buildings in New York. It was built in 2015, but it's on a very small lot, about 2,000 square feet. So the developer did not include an elevator. And at the time, I thought that was a selling point. I was like, well, elevators make the building so much more expensive. Your monthly fees go up. But then, I had these health problems. Not so great that I don't have an elevator. And I was that winter, I went back to Romania, where my mother lives, to visit her and her family. And she also lives in a 5-story building, and it had an elevator. And, Romania is a slightly less wealthy country than the United States. So I thought that was really interesting. Why is it that in Romania, a developer of a 5-story building can include an elevator, whereas in, New York City, sort of the command center of the global economy, they could not? And I started asking around. I knew how much an elevator costs in New York. And I asked an Italian architect how much an elevator there cost, and he told me a number that was so low that I think he must have not understood the question. So I started looking into it, and I realized, no, he was correct. That is how much an elevator costs. Is about a couple tens of thousands of dollars for a 5-stop elevator. I started looking into why. The size of them is very different, but I felt like there must have been more to it. So, for my first major research project for the Center for Building in North America, I chose to focus on elevators. It's only about 2% of the building, but pretty crucial part.
What does it cost in North America?
In North America, a 5-stop elevator in New York City, it would be $170,000 US. And then in Italy, it might be about 25 or 30,000 euros. So,
oh wow, huge difference.
Yeah, it's a very large difference. If you do some calculation to convert it, first of all, you convert the currency. And then also maybe you want to do a purchasing power parity adjustment just to account for the fact that in Italy also a coffee is cheaper, labor is cheaper, cost of living is lower. But even once you do that conversion, you still get about a 3x difference. In my report, I didn't find as many Canadian examples, so I couldn't include any, but anecdotally, I think Canadian elevator prices are about the same as the US. As in most things, I think Canada's a little better than the US, but still much, much, much more expensive than Western Europe.
Now, so does that affect the number of elevators in buildings, or how many buildings are like yours that don't have them? So do we have any idea of how that affects number of elevators per person or a metric like that in Europe versus North America?
Yeah, there's a dramatic difference. In the United States, there's about 3 elevators per 1,000 people in the country. In Canada, you guys don't keep as good of as good as statistics, but a couple provinces do. And from that, I came up with an estimate. I think it's about 4 elevators per 1,000 people. Um, in Europe, it ranges. Some of the older countries with a lot more walk-up buildings, like Germany or France, have, oh God, I don't know, about 8 or 9 per 1,000 people. But then in some of the southern European countries, especially, which have had like big building booms after World War II, there's like dozens of elevators per 1,000 people. I think Greece had the most, surprisingly. So there's way more elevators. Part of that is the fact that, Canada and the US are more suburban nations. However, for example, New York City has about the same population as Switzerland, and is obviously much more urban than Switzerland, but Switzerland has about twice as many passenger elevators as New York City. So it affects what buildings have elevators, especially in America. In the US, we have very weak laws requiring elevators in new buildings. So in Seattle, you've started to see new 6-story buildings with elevators, which is really tied to the fact that they allow single-stair buildings, which are very small. So you have very few units to spread the cost of an elevator over. In Canada, you have stricter accessibility laws. So my understanding is pretty much every apartment building will have an elevator. However, it affects when developers build apartment buildings at all. So often a developer will just not build an apartment building at all and build a bunch of townhouses, and then you sort of skip over the issue of elevators entirely. I think it's going to become a bigger issue in Canada as single family zoning is reconsidered. I know there's been moves in Toronto and Vancouver, in Victoria, and as planners are starting to think about how they can fit 3, 4, maybe 4 stories on a lot, developers are going to start to push the limits of the code, build taller walk-ups, maybe build buildings with what are called LULAs, like limited use, limited application. I can't remember what it stands for. Those sort of like dinky little elevators that are excruciatingly slow that no one would ever use unless they're like literally in a wheelchair. So I think it's going to become a bigger issue as zoning laws are reformed, as single stair buildings are legalized, which allows for much smaller buildings where the cost of an elevator is a much bigger consideration.
When you're comparing what people are building in North America to what people are building in places in Europe, is it the same like size elevator, or is it a fair comparison?
Yeah. No, the elevators in Europe are much smaller. In Europe, the typical new elevator will be, the size of the cabin will be 1.1 meters by 1.4 meters deep. Often, people probably have traveled in Europe and, been in some sort of ancient building in Rome and been in an elevator like so small they can't like turn around in. That's not what a new elevator is in Europe. A new elevator in Europe is sized for a person in a wheelchair, quite a large wheelchair, a power chair, to enter and to have somebody stand behind them. Realistically, you could probably squeeze another person standing behind them, but technically, one person in a wheelchair, one person behind them. You need to enter one direction and then exit sort of the same direction. Whereas in North America, we typically require 2 things. Number one, we require a turning radius. So someone in a wheelchair can enter and then make a full turn. At least if the elevator is empty. If there's people in the elevator, you probably can't do that anyway. You might have to back in or back out. But secondarily, we're also quite strict about requiring not just stretchers, but fully extended stretchers be accommodated in these buildings. And, if you've got the elevator and you're definitely going to have an elevator, that's great. Like it's great for people in wheelchairs. It's great for, people who have like medical emergencies and say you go into cardiac arrest and you need to be given sort of continuous chest compressions. However, if you don't have an elevator at all, it doesn't really matter how big the elevators are. And, for the most part, in North America, we just don't have elevators. We live in townhouses, we live in single-family houses, we live in older walk-up buildings, we live in older buildings that have elevators that don't even meet these standards. So there really is a trade-off between size, cost, and availability. And you can't just increase the size infinitely and expect developers to follow along. At some point, they leave the business of building multifamily entirely. For a high rise, that'll never happen. The size of the cabin, you have to build an elevator in a 40-story building. But for these like lower rise and mid-rise buildings, it's not guaranteed that the building will be built as an apartment building. It's not guaranteed that it will have an elevator, at least in the United States.
So, you mentioned earlier the cost differential between United States and Europe when it comes to elevators. Is that solely driven by the size, or is there something else going on as well?
No, there's definitely other things going on. I tried to isolate just size. Like if you just reduce the size, how much would costs fall? I got to something about like a third, plus or minus, with a pretty large uncertainty band around it. Could be as low as something in the teens percent, could be as high as 40 something percent. But there's still a lot of other things. So there's two other major issues. There's something that I'm sure you all wish we could spend hours talking about, which is technical codes and standards. And then the other one is labor. So let's do technical codes and standards first. So there's an elevator code, sometimes called a standard, that determines sort of like the finer points, how strong the doors need to be, what the testing procedures are, things about the toe guard, really minute details. So in North America, we've harmonized it between the US and Canada. But we are alone in the world in using this code. In the rest of the world, the code that is used, almost the entire rest of the world, except for Japan, is based on the European standard, which is called the EN 81 or the ISO 8100 family of codes. The technical differences between these codes are not very large. However, if you have some part, you have a small part, an elevator controller, a door, a landing door, whatever, there's lots of parts of an elevator, you have to get it certified that it complies with one of these codes. And if you get it certified with the European code, you get access to virtually the entire world. You get access to China, where the vast majority of elevators are installed. You get access to Europe, which is sort of the traditional home of the elevator industry in the 20th century. You get access to other growing markets, Latin America, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, whatever. So you can sell your part in a lot of places. If you get it certified to the North American code, you get access to North America, which is a relatively small market, about 1.1 million installed units. As a point of comparison, Europe has about 6 million installed elevators. China has 10 million installed elevators. So it's a relatively small market. So we sort of marooned ourselves on this technological island, this sort of regulatory island. So, if a part breaks down and you need to buy a new part, you can't just go, to a website of some, major manufacturer and choose from the largest catalog of parts. You need to choose from this very limited catalog of parts that are made for the North American market. So if your elevator is ever broken down and, they say, oh, we're waiting for the part to arrive, in the back of your head, you might think, I wonder if it would take this long if this elevator were in, Germany or Switzerland. So that's technical standards. There's also labor issues. I understand this better in the United States. Canada is maybe slightly different. I couldn't get as much insight into it, but at least in the United States, the union, it's called the International Union of Elevator Constructors, has negotiated some very special contract provisions in their labor contract that ban a lot of forms of pre-assembly and prefabrication. So, I don't know, maybe you've done an episode before, you've heard about sort of modular construction. You build a whole room in a factory, sort of like the dream of architects. And, since the, 60s or 70s, we're getting towards there, but some difficulties. But if you look at the elevator, there's even far more basic forms of pre-assembly and prefabrication are not allowed. So at least in the United States, possibly in Canada, I couldn't get as much insight. They will, the manufacturer and the union will fight over who gets to drill what holes where. So you're attaching one part to another. There's all these holes. The most efficient, precise, affordable way would be to do it in the factory. The union wants to do it sort of in the elevator shaft. The manufacturer doesn't want them to because, number one, it costs a lot of money, and number two, you can't get as precise of a location of your hole if you're doing it on the site. So they sort of argue over it. A labor arbitrator comes in and says, this hole is yours, this hole is mine, and this hole we can share. This hole has to be drilled very precisely, but traditionally it's been the union that does it. So how about this? Manufacturer, you drill a small hole in the factory, and then in the elevator shaft, the union can drill a larger hole. So we both get to drill the hole. We get to pay twice for this. There's other parts that come pre-assembled, and they're sort of they're made in some global factory serving the entire world in India or China or whatever, and it's just too much work to make a separate one for the U.S. and possibly Canadian market. So they have the mechanics just take them apart and then put them back together on the site. There are other issues regarding labor. North America does not have the strongest sort of technical vocational education in its high schools. This is like a really big thing in Europe, especially in Germany or Poland. It's very common for kids with a more technical aptitude who want to go into construction or something to sort of learn these skills in high school, and then it sort of builds a pool of labor for once you enter the workforce. In North America, we're sort of like a continent of desk workers, where everyone wants to be like a lawyer, entrepreneur, doctor, whatever. So, we don't like teach these skills in high school. And of course, a lot of kids don't end up doing that when they become adults, but, that's sort of how the schools are oriented. So the lack of technical education to, supply a construction workforce. I know in Canada, you guys have, immigration policies that are oriented towards this or that. And, in the European Union, they're just sort of a totally free labor market. You can come from, where my mother lives, Romania, to Germany, install elevators for 2 weeks and go home. The U.S. and Canada have a much sort of like tighter labor regime, and then you have like I discussed, the technical codes and standards.
So then you're saying that like if the labor is more expensive here, and the elevator cabs need to be larger than they are in Europe, it makes it too expensive to build elevators. People just choose not to build them at all.
Yeah, I mean the whole form of the townhouse is, you find this elsewhere. You find this in Spain. You find this in Italy. You might find it in Germany. But it's much more common in Europe to have small apartment buildings. So in Switzerland, super common to have a 3-4 unit apartment building that's maybe only 2 stories, and it'll have a small elevator in it. Whereas in North America, you'd never find that. That form would be you'd have 4 townhouses, 4 different stairs, 0 elevators. Maybe if the family is really rich, they would install an elevator after the fact that they would never use because it's excruciatingly slow, breaks down, everyone's afraid to use it. So, in the US, we often build walk-up apartment buildings. I don't believe you guys really allow that in Canada. So you don't get those in Canada, but you're more likely to just not get an apartment building at all. You're more likely to get a townhouse. It obviously wouldn't be in like a really central location, like downtown Vancouver or Toronto, but somewhere in the suburbs or sort of in an outlying location, a developer, not just because of the elevator, but, it is a big thing. They're more likely to say, you know what, we don't even need condos at all. We're just going to build townhouses. And in some case, they might even leave density on the table. The height limit might be, 4 or 5 stories, and the townhouse can only realistically be 4 stories. But, the cost of the elevator is so high, it doesn't make sense to build that, 5th floor or something. So you'll get fewer units. The units will be sort of more vertical. They'll be less accepting. They won't be accessible at all, except for maybe the ground floor, but often not even that. So yeah, it really does change the type of buildings that we build.
So the argument then I guess that you're making is that the standards for elevators are just too prohibitively expensive, and it means that people aren't getting any elevators. So it's better that if people get smaller elevators that aren't exactly necessarily as big as what the ideal would be, it's better that they get the smaller ones and get them in more places than not have them at all, right?
Yeah. Like let's take the example of, you have a medical emergency and, you break your back in a specific kind of way and you need to be taken out in a fully extended stretcher. If that happens at the top of a townhouse, you're totally screwed. I mean, there are ways to bring you downstairs in a stair chair or sort of stretcher, and they'll do their best. But, there's a lot more situations where it's helpful to bring somebody down sort of in an upright chair or in a stretcher that's been sort of, put in a sort of upright position than there are situations where the person needs to lie absolutely flat. So, and it's the same with accessibility. Ideally, it's nice to wheel in a wheelchair, turn around so you can enter face forward and exit face forward like somebody who is walking. However, in a lot of cases, you just won't be able to enter the building at all. So, there are trade-offs. There's trade-offs always in life. And sometimes the regulators who regulate the construction industry are not as attuned to those trade-offs as I think they should be.
So how do we fix this? Is this largely just adopting the global standard for elevators, or is there something else that we need to do?
Yeah, I would like to see the global standard adopted and this North American one phased out. I think, Canada has always been a little more internationally focused than the United States. So maybe you guys could take the first move and sort of shame the United States into following. You could allow both. You don't need to, just throw out all these North American rules. You could allow both. So that, yeah, on that front, I'd like to see that happen. I think that would also bring, the elevator industry is a bit of an oligopoly. There are, four main manufacturers: Kone, ThyssenKrupp, Otis, Schindler, based in the U.S. and Europe, and then there's some Japanese ones, um, Fujitech or something like that. And developers, regulators are often, unhappy at this oligopoly, but having these unique technical codes makes it very difficult for mid-sized firms to enter the market. So in Europe, there's a firm called Orona, based in Basque Country in Spain. There's Clemon, based in Greece. There's Schmidt und Sohn, based in Germany. And these companies, they look at the US and Canadian market and they say, wow, there's a lot of money to be made here. These elevators are quite expensive. We could undercut the big four by a little bit, and drive down the price. They'd only like to drive down the price gradually, but the way market competition works is you get enough people and the price falls even further. And they, from time to time, they look at the market and, they look at this code and they look at the costs of entering the market, and it's really, really high. So they decide, we're not going to, or they try it and it fails. So, that would bring more competition into the market. It might also, frankly, put a little bit of pressure on labor because, they would be coming in not as unionized firms. So, they would negotiate their own contracts with their own workers. And it, might put some pressure on the big four and their workers to adopt, somewhat more reasonable contract provisions or risk losing market share. So that's on the codes and standards. On the size, I found in New York City that a building is at risk of not having an elevator when it's less than about 24,000 square feet. I don't know what that is, 2,200 square meters, something like that. So, buildings that are smaller, I think it makes sense to allow smaller elevators. In Europe, they allow smaller elevators even in big buildings, but, different sensibilities. In North America, you could approach it in a more, moderate way. So I'd like to see that smaller elevators allowed in smaller buildings that are at risk of not getting built at all. The labor situation is a bit more tricky. I know the politics of immigration, Canada right now and the United States are very thorny, and they're probably not going to change your immigration policies to placate people who want more elevators. But, in the long run, birth rates are falling. The rest of the world's incomes are catching up. In the European Union, there's a European Union, and there's, full rights of mobility between, from Romania to Portugal to Germany, and then all of these sort of extra countries like Switzerland or Moldova or Ukraine and sort of get in through the back door. Maybe in the future there could be a North American Union, Caribbean Union, whatever, sort of allowing the free movement of labor, from the Caribbean, from Central America, Latin America, up to the wealthier countries in the North. And then, it'd be great for there to be better technical education in schools, not just for the elevator industry, but for construction in general, to supply workers and to, create a more regularized pathway for people who don't want to sit in front of a desk and send emails all day.
You're saying that there are standards that you're hoping will change. How realistic do you think it is that they actually will change?
So, the US and Canada used to have their own separate standards, and they harmonized, I guess about 2 decades ago. And the European global standard wasn't always the global standard either. It was sort of a long project of the European Union to first harmonize the codes within the bloc. And then they, sort of proselytized and got other countries on board. The big one more recently was China. So these codes are constantly changing. In Canada, I know there's been a push in the last couple of years to harmonize codes across the provinces. So I think, when things go through the normal process, when only these, industry and the building code people are paying attention, I think it's really hard to to push against entrenched interests and entrenched ways of doing things. However, if the public is aware of the issue and, they think back, to their mother who's living in a single family house and she should really be living in an apartment building, but, it's harder to find one in my neighborhood. If people think about how this affects them personally, the industry and the building code world and, all of these interests that have not traditionally, have been at home with the current environment, there are not that many people, frankly. And if the public gets sort of energized about this, I think you could see change. 15, 20 years ago, I think people, if you would have said, we should allow 3-4 units on a lot everywhere in Toronto, even in, the more suburban areas, people would have looked at you like you're crazy. And now it's
A couple of years ago, it was unthinkable.
Yeah, it's happening. So, as people learn about the issue and, contact your elected representatives, and I think change is very possible. It's a small world that has traditionally made these decisions. And if you bring the larger public into it, small shifts in opinion can make a big difference.
So, is there anything else that we haven't asked you that would be good to know about this?
So, these themes, the lack of harmonization of standards, difficult labor situation, sort of the over dimensioning of elevators, you find these in every aspect of the building. Like, it's not just elevators, these themes, the different standards you find in every single part of the building, the over dimensioning you can find it in plumbing and ventilation stacks. I was just recently in Canada for the first time in Toronto, and I was like shocked at how many like sprinkler heads you guys have aimed at windows, which I've never seen in the United States. Like this over dimensioning, you find it everywhere. And so if the elevator is only 2% of the building, it can be a little boring to focus on it. But if you understand the themes there, I think you can use it as a framework and a lens to see it throughout the building and to see other changes that can bring down the cost of construction and make housing more affordable.
Thanks so much for helping us understand that. It's a really interesting conversation about how we can, kind of take something that seems like it's like an isolated concept and then make it more general to how we can get more homes on the market to make life more affordable for more people. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Stephen.
Thanks so much for watching and listening. And thanks as always to our producer, Meredith Martin.
And if we have any building code regulators listening to the podcast, please let us know what you think at missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.